All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's August 10th, 2022. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, which just means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team and showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of the session today to our YouTube channel. So if you really like the content and want to support what we do over here, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a great deal. So with that said, let's get into a few announcements. First is that GitHub Projects, which you've probably seen if you've been following any open source projects out there, is officially GA, so it's publicly available to anyone who wants to use it. It is a fresh take on how to manage more complicated projects across multiple repositories with a single pane of glass view. What's cool about it is it has both table views, which are very great for project managers to quickly zip through and update issues, as well as more conventional Kanban style columns to move tasks between. Has anybody been using GitHub Projects already, the new edition, and been enjoying it?
Not really, but it looks good.
One thing I like is GitHub Actions roadmap. They use this just for their public roadmap, and I think it's a pretty cool display. And this is, I don't believe this is, yeah, exactly. It was moved here. So here you can kind of see they're using the project to display issues for a roadmap of the GitHub action, of GitHub's full-fledged product roadmap. And it's also broken down into actions, so you can drill down by action. So here's all the issues that way. But also, if you want to look at a table view, so it's very convenient that way, and filtering by any of the values is easy, just like in a normal spreadsheet. So I think it's pretty cool.
Anything's better than Jira.
Yeah. Now, I think it'd be cool if you could use projects across GitHub organizations, which is our problem at Cloud Posse, which is probably why works better for us right now within Jira. But I do have some FOMO on this because I really like it's a lot snappier. It's a lot more integrated into the product. So I think it makes sense. I think this is also in response, obviously, to GitLab putting pressure on them to improve the product. It's had better project management for a while. Cool. Anything else to add to this? All right. Next announcement, I think, Matt, you shared this with me or someone else. It's basically that GitHub Actions now supports M1 hardware. Multiple reasons why this is cool. Obviously, if you're building for M1s and you want to use GitHub Actions, that's one good reason. Another one is that you can even run it on developers' laptops if you want to try, if you're developing workflows. And I haven't tested what that experience looks like, but I know there's been other tools out there to try and replicate GitHub Action behavior locally, but they were never on par with GitHub Actions. So does this help the iterative process?
Yeah, I don't think it really helps that much because you still have to just start the GitHub, like the GitHub daemon, and then it listens for work to come down, and then it runs that work like directly on your Mac. It's not like it's not like it's running in a container on your Mac that you can then like clean up and do all of that kind of stuff easily.
But yeah, when you're trying, sometimes when you're trying to figure out, WTF is something not working, if you could just exec into the container, the workflow
Yeah,
would be.
yeah.
So I'm wondering if this helps for that kind of triaging, like not figure, why you can't figure out why your workflow is not working.
Maybe, although I would argue that it's unlikely that your laptop is set up the way that like the container that you're actually running it in probably would be set up, but But the interesting thing that I should have mentioned with this is not that long ago, I know, well, maybe it was, I don't know, 6 months ago now. I remember like Apple also released that you can launch, I mean, not Apple, AWS, you can launch EC2 instances that run on M1 hardware. So you can combine those two and actually run like CICD jobs like, on M1 hardware in AWS with self-hosted runners now, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a good logical connection there.
Yeah.
All right. Last week, we had an announcement from the Tinder security team and a write-up they had done on auditing GitHub Action workflows for exfiltration and bad practices and so forth. Checkov, not to be outdone, makers of Bridge Crew, they released new policies here to help audit your GitHub Action workflows, and it's not tied to just GitHub Actions, and also for GitLab Runners and CircleCI and Argo workflows as well. As with most of these kinds of things, having the policy engine is great. Coming up with all your policies, that's the hard part. And I'm not sure how robust their library is, but
yeah, it's got some pretty good starting points on there, for sure.
New policies include ensuring each pull request has at least 2 reviewers, each individual commit assigned, preventing the use of deprecated commands and beta features of GitHub Actions, basically making sure your workflows stay current, preventing exfiltration with curl, blocking privileged workflow pods, and more. So yeah, that's cool. Worth checking out.
Yeah, the one that I'd love to see someone put in for, I don't know that we would use it, but in enterprises, I've seen this be really useful, is that ensure that someone that's approving the PR didn't contribute at all to the PR. Because that's
a really good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wrote some custom logic to do that in the past, and it was really difficult to write that. So I'd love to see an out of the box way to see that, because then 2 people can collude to introduce something, into the workflow kind of, if you don't have that correct, you could basically just be like,
very
hey,
frequently you can just hijack the branch, right?
That's interesting, because Azure DevOps has that as like you can check that box to say, someone can't approve their own if they're a contributor their own thing. So
yeah. So to be clear, GitHub, the way that it works is that if you're the original author of the PR, like if you open the PR, you can't approve it. But let's say Eric opens a PR, then I come along and I add 2 commits that are malicious code, but then I can then approve the PR that Eric opened. That includes the two commits that I added to that PR, which is like it's a workaround that you can, as we were saying, you can hijack someone else's branch / PR to make that happen. Yeah, it's definitely not in there. I had to write custom logic to make that happen. They have a lot of them. I know, it's not. Yeah, that's one of them.
But this one's new here. This is really cool.
Yeah, that's been there for a while.
People use. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Cool. Actually, a perfect segue into a special request here from Pepe Amengual. He's one of the maintainers here of Atlantis, and we mentioned in previous office hours that they have a pre-release 0.19.8 which includes the plan and apply endpoints, which you can use for drift detection. For example, if you're using Atlantis in your organization, they are looking for more beta testers of this functionality before they cut a release. And Pepe is very eager to see this get released. So if you're using Atlantis and you're willing to kick the tires on this some more, please get involved. If you click on this link here on the release to 997, that is the pull request that implemented the functionality, and any problems that you have, I'm sure you can post there or open a new issue. So far, I don't see any new issues opened up as a result of this PR merging and no links to it. So it's a good sign. All right. Next announcement. Cloud, our Slack community, slack.cloudposse.com, has a Slack archive. I guess we didn't look at it on the side there. So we frequently get asked, how did we do this and what are we using? And unfortunately, this is one of the few things we haven't open sourced at Cloud Posse, but this is how we expose all of our Slack channels publicly. So somebody did bring it to my attention that there's another project now that's come out called SaveSlack.com. So I see these sites pop up from time to time. They always get shut down within probably 6 months or less. Either maybe Steam is lost or Slack sues them. So if you want to create a static site for your community, hop on the bandwagon.
Quick question: how do we export Slack exactly? Like, if there is a way to actually
there's no API. You have to log in to Slack itself and click an export link.
Oh.
And then you can export a time period, either the entire time period since the beginning of time, or you can do like the last week or 30 days and so forth. And it's a JSON dump of every single message in a public channel. Obviously, no private channels and no private messages.
Yeah, so there actually is an API to do that as well.
Maybe if it's a public, maybe if it's a paid plan, but not on a free plan.
Oh, that could be, yeah. Because I know for compliance purposes, another thing I had to write one time was an archive of all of our Slack messages across several channels to S3. So, and I use the API to do that.
Yeah.
Or actually, I used the Slack app. It was a web, so it was actually a Slack app to do it. So, which then authenticates, and then it gets a copy of every message, and then it just wrote every message to S3.
Yeah. All right. Next one came across my LinkedIn news feed. This is not a new post. I think we've even reposted it previously, but it's been updated. The general advice here is to stop using CPU limits and just focus on using CPU requests. They, in the end, achieve more or less the same thing. There's a misnomer that if you're not using CPU limits, then you are not you are subject to having the noisy neighbor problem. But that's really what CPU requests accomplishes in a better way. And he gives a really great analogy here with 3 stories that anyone can understand. Basically, of 3 people out in the desert who have to share 3 bottles of water. And whether you're doing it with limits or requests or with none of them, the outcome and how it goes. And it turns out requests gives you the best outcome for everyone. Anything to add to this?
I thought the analogies were good when I read it.
Yeah, that's it too. So CDKTF, aka CDK for Terraform, which is a way to get, I don't know if it's fair to make the analogy, but a more like Pulumi-like experience for working with Terraform. This has been under development for some time. It's now generally available and supported, and they've added support for Golang, and also already had support for TypeScript, Python, C# and Java. I'm still not that excited about this, but I'd be very curious to learn from those who are. The message that sums up my opinion on this is in the corresponding Reddit post, which is this one here. So, when I started using Terraform, I was coming from a purely dev background and got immediately frustrated when I couldn't apply some basic programming concepts in HCL. After a while, something clicked in my brain and I stopped trying to force it to do something it wasn't supposed to do and treat it like a declarative language it is. I've since realized that this way lends itself to a more standardized approach, is what you normally want when dealing with infrastructure, less quirks, idiosyncrasies than when using scripting languages.
So
Matt, any or anyone else?
I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I agree with all of the above, and the one case where I see potential for CDK for Terraform is in like a shift left scenario. At a place where I was working, the developers were enabled and empowered to sort of create their own dev environments, and they really weren't comfortable with HCL. They didn't really want to learn it. It was clunky for them. We wrapped everything in modules as best we could, but still, it would have been nice if we could have given them something like this, wrap it up in Python or Go or whatever they're using, and let them do it. They kind of did that with a bunch of really ugly wrappers and stuff like that. So I could see this as having been a benefit there.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it doesn't fix a bunch of things that I wanted it to fix, in terms of like more dynamic passing of providers into modules and stuff. So.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember about the CDK is that it itself is still declarative. It's just an abstraction that makes it easier to write those declarations, and you can do some other things like to help that. But at the end of the day, CDK is still a declarative, I don't want to see language, whatever, a declarative framework that you have to use to define your infrastructure as code.
But with something like CDKTF, could one get around some of those problems that people frequently have, like on iterating over modules that need to have multiple providers, provider connection information? So
yes.
since CDKTF could then generate it, you wouldn't have that problem, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's so like if you have to apply something across all of your AWS regions or something like that, it can solve that a lot better than doing it in pure Terraform.
You can also use it to, like, if you need to grab something from another resource that you don't have an output for or something, or iterate over something like that, you could use it in Python or something like that. But I tried playing with it and just couldn't get my brain around either. I'm so used to the old way of doing it, their Terraform way.
So somebody commented that it is declarative, but it's really easy to mix declarative and imperative. Anyway, procedural stuff, right? And forget which sort of context you're dealing with at the time, because it will allow it, but you can get yourself into a bad situation.
Yeah, I think in keeping things dry and improving composability and using iteration in particular, it helps with a lot of those things that I think Terraform itself sort of falls over on, but it still doesn't give you the true freedom of running in an actually imperative language to do like what you want to do.
Because I think ultimately in the back end, right, it's still giving you a declarative. It's still giving you the Terraform code in its native way. So
it writes out
generates
Terraform JSON.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're not going to be able to use your debugger in the way you maybe want to be able to do it and set breakpoints and use the your formal language the way you'd like to.
And there are also some really weird things, especially in like in the languages that that support like a single thread, like TypeScript or whatever, where a lot of the implementation of the core are async calls. So you actually have to wait for certain things to resolve before you can use them in other places, and it makes it a little tricky. It makes it pretty easy to shoot yourself in the foot when you think something will be easy to pass between like two CDK modules. It might not be as easy as you think, because one actually has to apply through Terraform first before that resolves the async, and then you get it back, and you're not expecting that there's like this wait loop. So it's pretty but it's an improvement if you have a lot of that kind of stuff to do. But it's just another layer of abstraction, unfortunately. I don't think it's not the panacea of solving the fact that it's declarative under the hood.
You know what got me is if you have a module that calls another module, they all have to be contained in that same module directory. Like you can't have one module directory that you refer to. It all has to be within its own CDK. So you have to like have multiple things. If something calls null, it's got to be within its own module directory of the module. So you might have null 50 times. It's really weird how that's all set up, or at least that's what I experienced.
I'm really curious how this is a non sequitur a little bit, but as part of that announcement, they also mentioned that there's a GitHub action that helps you use this together with Terraform Cloud. Obviously, Terraform Cloud isn't going to let you just run the commands to compile this into Terraform. So, like, how is that handoff done? Are you actually, how does it compile down to the Terraform, and then
I would guess that it just sends that Terraform JSON that it produces using the cloud, the API, and does it that way. So using cloud, you can send HCL or JSON directly into it. You don't have to send the files.
Interesting. So it doesn't work strictly on VCS commits. You can tell it to just run.
No. There's an API that does it. Yeah. That's how the Terraform operator works. The Kubernetes Terraform operator.
Oh, good point. I didn't think about how that works. Okay. Interesting. And you know if that works with the new drift detection in Terraform Cloud too? Is it somehow keeping a copy of that?
I mean, there's still a state. So yeah, I mean, you should be able to detect drift. But no, I don't know. I haven't used that.
But the drift would be
it would have to checkpoint. It would have to checkpoint that API call basically to say like this is the source that generated this state, and it would have to then like keep applying that source basically to see if anything changed in the actual infrastructure that was provisioned, right? In order for that to happen. I don't know if they do that. I don't know anything about this feature, but it seems like a hard problem to solve.
Yeah. Oh, sorry for the sirens in the background.
I have one other quick announcement before we get to Q&A. I noticed it just got announced earlier today that there's now a single API that you can call to snapshot all or a subset of the EBS volumes attached to an EC2 instance in a crash-friendly manner. So they'll all be synchronized to the same point in time. So I can literally, if I have like 5 EBS volumes as an example, say I'm running like a database and I have like log files on one and multiple data shards across the others, I can actually like with one API call can actually now get a consistent snapshot of all of my volumes at one point in time, and then be able to restore them so that they'll all come back at the exact point in time. I thought that was pretty cool.
That's cool. Also, like in a RAID scenario, maybe. Where all the
same idea.
are working together. Yeah.
Yeah, and before you would have to call each of the APIs, like basically either in a loop, or you'd have to like spawn off threads to do it. And then you would often get like slight delays in, to up to hundreds of milliseconds of, difference. And obviously that can lead to data corruption if you're trying to resort to I'll restore those from the snapshot. I think I have, I found the link here. I can DM it to you.
Yeah, you can send that to Linda. She'll keep she'll publish a list of all the links today.
All right, there you
Cool.
go. Linda.
Any other announcements before we get into Q&A? By anyone? Cool. All right, we'll get into Q&A. I only had one teed up here. It was by Isaac. Isaac, are you on the call today? Scanning the participants here quickly. Looks like we don't have Isaac, but I'll take a pass at it. It's a question that comes up all the time for us, and do have some opinions on it, Matt too, probably, and others. So let me pull up the Slack message here. So discussion topic is, I have the privilege of designing the VPCs for my organization, and I'm looking for insights. What would you do differently if you had this luxury, e.g. using IPAM? And should you go with like a multi-account, multi-VPC, or embrace this, the touted simplicity of a shared VPC? So let me start by going into some of the information that we have here. So this is one of the standard things we answer as part of our reference architecture when we go through this implementation with our customers. We have a few of them. So let me see here. So the CIDR strategy would be one of them. Oops, I have to open that. VPC isolation strategy. Guess the control click is not working. VPC. And that strategy. I don't know if I open up all these new windows or whatnot, but so a few thoughts. So where to begin? So there's a lot of considerations when designing the VPC strategy for your organization. I think one of the main considerations would be if you are going to be working with other organizations and how you pick your subnets for your various VPCs. So one of the considerations is making sure you don't pick your subnets too large, and the other is also, working with all the other partners or organizations and figuring out what their CIDR ranges are going to be so you do not conflict with them. The other is your business or your organization itself. I don't know how large your company is. If you are enterprise scale with 10,000 people, or you're more startup scale with 300 people, there's a big difference when you're building for those two systems. In the former, where you have 10,000 people and countless divisions, acquisitions, divisions across regions, and so forth, who owns the IPs? Who is managing that? What's the consensus? And this is where, like, when you bring up the topic of using IPAM, could be one of the considerations. So that's a IP address manager. Amazon has their IP address manager. I believe there's some other solutions, Matt, like Halin's brought up in the past when we talked about this. But the long and short of it is, you can do the math yourself in Terraform, easy peasy. But is the entire enterprise going to be using your Terraform, or is it going to be your division? And how, like, when you have the luxury of designing this, is it for like some division of this larger enterprise, and they're going to tell you kind of the parameters of what you can do, or is it literally for the entire enterprise? So that's the first set of things. Before I move on, to talk about NAT gateways and allocations and transit gateways and all of that other stuff. Matt, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that's right. I think the other consideration to take when doing this design work is not only just organizational boundaries, but security boundaries and you know, least privilege and all of that kind of stuff. I think that definitely comes into play when trying to work this all out.
Well, let's walk that back a moment. So let's say that taking compliance into account. So what technical benchmarks for compliance do you need to comply with as an organization? And then factoring that into then the subsequent decisions on the boundaries and segments of the networks and workloads that you'll have to worry about. These things are at odds with each other. I would say, depending on the sophistication of your organization and the level of compliance you need, the simpler you can make your VPC architecture and your subnetting architecture, the happier you will be. But it comes with trade-offs. So the problem is, if you take this strictly from a network architecture and security perspective, you're going to want to create as many subnets and as many networks, basically, as you have workloads to segment it. You'll also want to factor in how many regions you're operating in. And this can explode the number of networks and how you divide up that IP space gets complicated. So also, you know, resizing those VPCs, you can now add subnets to it, but it gets complicated to manage all the IP address space, which is why IPAM or those other tools also exist. By the way, AWS IA has a IPAM Terraform module that we've been kicking the tires on, and the initial feedback is that it's been very nice. So if you are looking to adopt IPAM, the official one by AWS is a good place to start looking. Curious Test, what are they doing? Oh, are they using TerraTest now? Yeah, they are. Wow, look at that. All right, other factors are, how is traffic going to ingress into your network? How is traffic going to egress from your network? And are you going to have any peering or VPN connections, you know, to your data centers and so forth? So this also ties into the shared VPC idea. Now, on the one hand, shared VPC sounds great. Why don't you just create one VPC for your entire organization, break it up into subnets, and you know, just turn this into a networking problem at that level. What I don't like about it is now you have this singleton VPC in your organization that's in the critical path of everything. You're not testing changes to it in stages, like in a dev stage, staging stage, production stage, and so forth. You are really setting yourself up to be managed by a central network organization, perhaps in your enterprise, whose sole job is to do that. And that's where I think it makes the most sense. Is if it's a more old school enterprise and that's how you want to manage your networks, and it's centralized and it's probably by ClickOps, maybe the shared VPC is the way you're going to be going there. What we always prescribe to our customers is you provision one or more VPCs per AWS account, and we by default lean towards having just one VPC per account managed by Terraform. The next consideration then is, how is your traffic going to ingress and egress to that VPC? And this is where some of the compliance frameworks come into play, depending on how you need to monitor the traffic going in and out of your networks. So a common pattern there is you have a transit account in your organization. That transit account will have your NAT gateways and your internet gateways, and this is where you can deploy your firewall manager, and it's how you can then have centralized control over everything that comes in and out of your organization. Keyword there being centralized. I guess you can have one or more of these accounts so you can test changes somewhere else, but effectively it's usually just one of these accounts in the organization. So I would hate to be the person in charge of that one account responsible for all ingress and egress of the organization, because one misfire, one miscalculation, and everything is down. Not the
Yeah,
position of it.
and there are some actual like real gotchas with that. Like I remember one of the things I hit was, what is it? Like, I think the owner is like the main, whoever starts up the VPC, that's the owner, and then they share it with the other participants. And if you're a participant, you can't launch resources that use security groups that are created by other participants or the owner itself. Like, so if you want to use shared, one of the main reasons you would think to do this would be, oh yeah, because now I can just use the same security groups like everywhere, and it's much easier to audit. Well, that means that all of those security groups have to be provisioned in that like owner account or whatever it's called, like the master account, whoever shared the VPC to start out with. And then it gets even more complicated when you share subnets, because you can actually share subnets across accounts as well. And then when you start doing that, like it limits where you're allowed to make changes to those subnets and the routing tables and all of those things. So if you have your infrastructure as code broken down where you want to deploy to like a dev account, you like those modules that are built to think that they can create storage groups and change subnets and add rules, etc., don't necessarily work in those shared VPC environments anymore. It falls over and gives you like really weird messages and then you figure out that's the root cause of them.
That's a really good point. And we are not testing, I'll be honest, our Cloud Posse modules to work in shared VPC. So you're probably going to have problems with that. And if you're going to have problems with our modules, then you're probably going to have problems with most other open source modules, because it is an unconventional way of operating.
Yeah.
What other considerations should we think about?
Oh, yeah, sorry. The other thing that I was going to say is that I remember this one too, is that if you're a participant, you can't see the tags that exist on the shared resources, even though those resources are there. So if you try to find subnets by tag, as an example, that are shared with you, you actually don't have view access to those tags. So you can't actually use that method to locate resources that are within the shared VPC basically itself. So I remember that was another gotcha that because I had something that was trying to add, distribute things across multiple subnets and making sure that we did that, and we were trying to use tags to identify them, and that didn't work. So
yeah. So I think that was a mouthful, a lot of little considerations to think about. Isaac, I'd be happy to talk to you more directly if you ever want to set up some time and go through some more of those considerations, because there's quite a lot, especially if you're also factoring in multi-region and compliance. So anyone else have something they'd like to add to VPC and subnet architectures for somebody designing this from scratch for an organization?
I've got something that's kind of a potentially something to consider. And at one of my former companies, I had an interesting architecture in that we were like 300 engineers working on a fairly complicated software project, and teams would have their own AWS accounts. But the thing is, particularly in the development space, we were able to mostly have the same IP ranges for all of our VPCs because none of our stacks needed to overlap. So there's this question that I would ask when designing the VPC architecture is, what actually needs to be addressable? And if you take that into account, then I think you can reduce the complexity somewhat. Particularly if you have like a special case like this, where in our case, we're doing a lot of development work in isolated stacks that really didn't need to address anything else. So that's something to consider, I think.
So
yeah, although go ahead, Dark, sorry.
No, but you go ahead, Matt, please.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to say, I think that using the AWS IPAM solution in particular, which I know probably didn't exist in its current form at the time, would actually kind of make that a moot point as long as you didn't exceed like the total amount of private address space that you could use, like in general, which is pretty big. Like, but you can exceed it if you do a poor job of subnetting it. But in that case, like it can dynamically give you a block that works, properly. But if everyone is taking, a /12 or whatever out of there, then obviously you're going to run out of space when you have more than a few environments.
Yeah,
kind of
thing. Very good point. Our use case is kind of unique in that, well, one of the systems that we were developing actually was responsible for managing IP addresses. So like they all needed to have that 10/ as a default configuration. But yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. It's it's also interesting that within a VPC, within an account, you might also have multiple VPCs, and some of those VPCs could actually have overlapping IPs. But the VPCs that you'd ever conceivably need to peer with other networks would be a problem. But I'll give you another real practical example why we pretty much say never do it, at least for the architectures we deploy, and that is that we always have an account somewhere for automation. And how do we, automate database schemas or things in private EKS clusters if we can't connect to them? And therefore, we have this transit gateway that connects all the VPCs and the different accounts to the hub, and then we can connect to that from the automation account. And if the IPs were overlapping, it would not be doable. So.
It would be doable, but you would need to use inbound and outbound NAT gateways
to talk to each one,
which would be a giant pain in the ass. But yes,
and we all love spending extra money for NAT gateways
or NAT instances. You could use NAT instances as well.
NAT instances have technically been deprecated, but
yeah, there are also some third-party products that would help you do that. But yeah. They have some like router virtual appliances that you can do natting with and all of those types of things. But I would agree, you don't want to get in that scenario unless you absolutely have to. It's ugly.
I should note that I'm sure that's been covered here before. But regarding NAT gateways, there's literally a company, and I'll find it and I'll post it. Literally a company that their whole value add is that they're cheaper than AWS NAT gateways.
Interesting. I did not know that. It's interesting. There's this little niche industries kind of on top of AWS catering towards those things.
But when it's $1 trillion company, right? Like even 1% or 0.5% of clientele is probably a shit ton of money.
Yeah. It's just I would it's a lot of money, but I really would hate to have a business where my one call to, claim to fame rather, is, hey, we are cheaper than NAT gateways. And then AWS says, hey, guess what? We decided to lower the price of NAT gateways. And, there goes my business model. So your whole business model is trying to do something cheaper than AWS. At AWS scale, they're pretty darn good at doing things cheaper, at least eventually. All right, so that was the only question I had teed up for today. I didn't see any other questions in the Zoom chat, and I don't see any other in the Slack chat.
I have a question. Yeah,
go for it.
So on average, how big of a team of DevOps engineers do you guys support? And I ask this because I have a team, I have 36 applications and 5 development teams that I support in DevOps, and it's only me and one other guy, and we're just completely can't even get our head above water. And I'm interested to see how big teams are for opposed to how many software teams you support and how many applications.
I think you're going to get a wide range of answers.
Yeah, I guess not. I guess there's not standard. So when you size out a client and you have support, can you give me a little insight there on how you would do that?
Yeah. So Cloud Posse only takes on engagements with customers that have in-house DevOps because we don't believe that you can outsource that successfully in the long run. What we typically see, though, is that teams will have 2 to 3 people dedicated. Well, I'd say dedicated might be a strong word. Responsible for owning whatever we hand off to them. I've seen it fail when those teams really just don't put in enough investment to understand how it works, and I've seen it succeed when more and more of the overall interest lies with the developers. So it's not just you're not hamstrung by 2 or 3 individuals who own it, but that pretty much every developer who's doing backend things has some ownership over their pieces or their components.
Okay.
So I would say that if you're supporting 30 people and you're 2 people on the DevOps side, strictly DevOps, and then you're supporting 30, and though they are not contributing at all to like writing Terraform code, keeping it up to date or whatnot, you're going to be struggling.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. I'm fighting for resources here, and I'm getting pushback that we're fine, and I don't understand how we're fine, but it's whatever. I was just trying to see other teams because I had talked to another gentleman who was supporting almost exactly the same situation I was, and he had 4 engineers, and they said even with their 4, they're pretty much right there at the mark with their 4, writing Terraform, getting the Kubernetes set up, and all that. So,
yeah. Matt, you were going to add something.
I was going to say that the reason that it varies so wildly is that organizations are at different levels of the maturity model, I'll say, based on DevOps and have varying degrees of automation and all those things in place. If you're a highly automated, team that's been doing this for a while, you have mature self-healing systems, and you're not spending more than 50% of your time on toil, as an example, then 15-to-1 doesn't actually seem that crazy. But if this is like a new organization that doesn't have that much automated yet, and you're still building things out and trying to get to that point, et cetera, then you're probably way too overloaded on those sides, on that side. Yeah. So I think it's that's a way to sort of gauge it too, like is the level of the organization. If you're still early in DevOps journey, you need more people and more resources to build things out and automate them before you can get to those ratios.
I was in a similar situation, and we had like a team of 7 consultants for about a year, like building out all the CICD, like infrastructure as code. And they did a great job, and then they were done, and we had like 4 full-time, I guess including managers, it was like 3 full-time people taking care of it. And the developers, the app developers were heavily involved. They were very self-serve, and like we had some compliance stuff, so like we had to have some separation of duties and things like that. So that's kind of what the full-time operations team did.
That really helps actually a lot, Eric, because I got hired 1.5 years ago, and they never even had one DevOps team. I mean, they were literally still deploying by hand and copying files over from their laptops. Yeah, I mean, real bad. And I was the only one who came in, and now I'm a manager, and I got one guy that I pulled off the operations team who's not really a DevOps guy. So I'm training him at the same time, and we're just swamped, and I'm trying to gauge it. So, all right.
Hey, sounds like you need Cloud Posse.
I tried already. I actually tried to engage you guys. Yep.
One of the strings I pulled recently in relation to this has to do with, I'm a single DevOps. We lost the one guy that I had. And it's just basically, so it's just me. But everything's Terraform, everything's automated. Last week I had the first prod deploy of the applications where I was like, what? That's done? Yay.
And you weren't involved.
I
Right.
wasn't involved. I heard about it afterwards. It was like the best thing that ever happened to me. But the point is that even with all that, it's just me. And my boss like is generally familiar with this stuff, but he's not like a sick like OCD Terraform guy who knows he's going to screw himself in 3 weeks or 3 months or years if you're not like right on top of this stuff. So I'm left reviewing my own PRs, but the real point is you need more eyes, you need more ownership, you need more people who like, hold the whole infrastructure in their mind, so that when the PR that I put through to update my Datadog configs in each of my accounts, not only updated the host filter to say Datadog : true, but I actually also put Datadog : true in the host tags field, which which sets every single EC2 host to be reporting to Datadog, which is like twice as many as I wanted, and the tags don't show up in AWS. So I'm like doing 60 things. I'm like, well, this doesn't look like, let me look at those tags. Anyway, it only showed up in Datadog. And my point is that somebody else, like if that was somebody else's PR, I might have looked at that and said, hey, that's not right. So from
The old Datadog cache burn.
But also like security. This is your bread and butter. Anyway, that's just another argument that I've been making lately for this. More resources.
Well, it's good to know that I'm not alone, right? So, but
alone in our aloneness.
One area I also see teams struggle with is if you use a lot of open source, it's not free. You have to stay on top of it, and keeping it updated is a lot of work. So now if you compound that with you're using a lot of open source, say Terraform, you're using a lot of open source products, say self-hosted Sentry, self-hosted Prometheus, Grafana, etc. You're going to spend half your time keeping that stuff up to date. So
I've literally, I mean, we've all had this, but I was talking to our TPM a while back when we first got our Spacelift stuff going, and they were like, well, isn't Spacelift just like plug and play? And I didn't even know what to say to that.
yeah, I wish it was that easy.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll just add one thing, like, this is where I was saying like your levels of automation come like really into play. I'll just take Eric Berg, your example that you just gave is, as an example, if you had a metric that had either anomaly detection or bounds on it, that said like number of hosts, under management, and that was one of the things that you were monitoring, like you would have immediately gotten an alert after your PR, like number of hosts under management or number of hosts reporting just quadrupled or whatever, or doubled or whatever, and you would have been like, oh shit, I got to go back and fix that thing and go fix it, And I think as you're automating things, like, and as you're deploying things, especially on smaller teams, like, or single person, teams, always try to think of like, what are the ways that I can get burned by this, and put in some guardrails for yourself to make sure that you catch those things. And that, and this just happens to be you're monitoring too many things, so your Datadog bill went up, but obviously lots of times we can do silly things that make it catastrophic or are really hard to recover from. So if you're always using that mindset of how can I not shoot myself in the foot? What kind of guardrails can I put in? What kind of monitoring can I put in? Even if it takes you a little bit longer, like the fallacy of, well, it takes too long to do that is probably going to like pay itself off in folds, somewhere down the line in the not too distant future for yourself. So just a piece of advice, I guess, there for everyone on that one.
Well, that's what I'm running into. I'm trying to get Terraform involved, and every time I want to just like concentrate on Terraform, I'm getting tasked with all these manual. Like now I got to go through all my AWS accounts and manually find all the deltas. When I said, let us finish the Terraform, there are no deltas.
Yeah.
So
The company doesn't value
Yep.
Yeah, what Terraform is doing, what you're trying to do. That's
Yep.
Eric, if we still have like 1 minute, I just want to,
we do.
it was an
ahead.
announcement. It was an announcement that I saw that I thought was actually pretty funny. And so AWS released this thing called Cloudscape. And it's basically a whole bunch of React components that are the React components that AWS uses to build the AWS like console, which I happen to think is like one of the worst user experiences ever. But I just thought it was pretty funny that they released this as this like example of a design system that you should use. And they're like, this is what we use to power the AWS console.
I know.
And I was like, I would never use this thing.
I had the same.
So I know it was a couple
thought,
weeks ago,
yeah.
but I just saw it recently. So I thought that was a funny one.
Yeah. How does the expression go? Something about babies and beauty. Forget.
Yeah, I'm definitely calling the AWS baby ugly.
Yeah.
What it does under the hood is phenomenal 99% of the time, but their user experience for like managing it through the console has always been terrible. It just is not good.
It's gotten a little bit better over the years, but
A little bit,
still, still feels antiquated compared to.
It went from horrendous to terrible.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in our office hours today. We'll be posting a recording of this to our YouTube channel, so you can go to youtube.com/cloudposse and share these recordings with your team if they can't catch our live sessions. If you haven't yet taken the quiz that we offer here at Cloud Posse to see if we're a fit, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz, and we'll see if there's a way we can work with you. Always feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/im/Osterman and connect with me. I love to stay in the loop with what everyone's working on. And to register for our weekly office hours and get a invitation, go to cloudposse.com/office hours and register. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. Thank you all. See you all next week. Same time, same place.
Thanks, Eric. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Eric.